Today, I'm sharing my principles to always learn better, being ahead from the market. Like, how can we keep learning and using the best technologies? And also how we can feel always driven by something, because at some point, maybe you might not feel like as passionate as you used to. And that's normal. It's because, time passes, and that's why we have to find new challenges. We have to find new things that will again make our Monday morning super exciting, because we think, wow, yes, I will do that. And then I will do that. And then I will do that. And then I will learn that. The first thing is always to think about, okay, I'm a freelancer, I'm a contractor, I'm an employee, how I can make the infra, the architecture, the software better. Maybe we want to scale horizontally or vertically. When we do vertically scale, we have to add more and more CPU, more and more resources. It might not scale very well. It depends. If you are working on a server side rendering like a PHP with like Smarty or Twig with Symfony, it might be fine. It depends of how much traffic you have and what's your plan in the long term. And always asking the company, oh, what's your plan actually? And how much traffic do you want? Like, there are some niche where we know by default that it will not have a lot of traffic. It's very profitable, but because it's so niched, it has its limitation. The market is so small, it will not go further. In my case, usually I like to see, I always have a notebook with me, and I like to take a pen. Of course, if I'm in the office, I will use a whiteboard. I like to go on different whiteboard drawing websites if I have my computer with me, but otherwise I just do it on pen and paper. And I try to think, okay, what if instead we haven't built anything yet? We want to go horizontally instead of vertically. Horizontally has a lot of advantage as well when we want to scale, because when we go horizontal, we have to add more and more servers. The setup might be more complicated at first, but then we can scale and we can handle better the traffic. We can serve more and more users. In that way, we have to ensure that we are stateless, the opposite of a server-side rendering where we are stateful because we use sessions. Stateless is like a RESTful API or a GraphQL API. There's no states, there's no sessions. It's stateless, it's working by itself. And that's one way we could help, and we could go with the horizontal scaling over the vertical scale. You could also think about, we have an application, it's a React Native app that's really good. The user is a note-taking app, and the user is, or maybe it's a reminder app, let's say, and the user is adding some notes, and then we have the server, and it needs to sync the local data with the remote server. How we can do that? CouchDB is one of the most famous database out there for doing that. And you have PunchDB for the web browser. It uses the CouchDB cluster from the cloud. But PunchDB is really a JavaScript based library that will use the CouchDB cluster. And it's a really good way to sync your local data with the server data. And that way, every time the user saves things on locally, it will save in the local database. I think I'm not sure if it's SQLite. I forgot the way exactly it works, but it will save it locally, and then it will sync automatically to the server. Something else you could also sync and help is like, we have issues at the moment with the API. The validation of the API, there's a backend team and a front-end team, and the validation is not consistent. That means we have like the front-end team, or even by yourself, it's easy to make that mistake. You will add a new property, you will change the payload, and you send an extra property to the backend. But because the way you communicate with the front-end and the backend, the types are not synced, it's an issue. And you have a solution for that. It's the T for TypeScript, TRPC. TRPC, I highly suggest you to have a look. TRPC, so T stands for TypeScript, and then R for remote. TRPC, it will have your types check being in one place, and you will be able to use the same type safely both on the backend and the front end. And so it's a type safe library where you know that you will not ever forget to miss one type update somewhere on the backend or front end, or especially if you have multiple backends, thanks to TRPC. Because if it could happen, it will happen. This is the Murphy law. And thanks to the TRPC, again, trpc.io, I highly suggest you to have a look to that project. It's amazing. I love it. You will be able to solve a painful problem. If you want to have validation, like you can use Zod as well. Zod is a good library, very famous in the Next.js ecosystem because Zod is the default one in Next.js. In Nest.js is also really good. Nest.js, it's a backend, it's a Node TypeScript framework, and Next.js, that's the one from Vercel. But Next.js is like similar to Express.js. Nest, so you have Nest and Next. I know it's a bit confusing, but Nest is like a nest for birds, you know. And Nest.js, I started using it like 3-4 years ago. I was a bit annoyed at that time. I mean, a bit, not upset, but I don't really understand. Like, I was using Express.js for so long, but they don't support natively TypeScript. It's an old framework, and of course it has been built with JavaScript. They have the TypeScript types you can install, but it's not a TypeScript first framework, and that's okay. But they don't also update much anymore. The framework, it's a very stable, very mature framework. It's a lightweight one too, which is really good, but it doesn't do too much. Like if you have a very complex API architecture, Nest.js is definitely better. Nest.js is not as lightweight as Express.js for sure, but it will help you to architect your code very well. You have the controllers, you have the modules, you have the services. It's more about how you can architect all of this very well. And then the test, the spec, control.spec. Express.js is very flexible. And with Nest.js, you can easily like document your controllers with OpenAPI. You have the Swagger Nest.js, you have the Cache Manager, you have a lot of really nice libraries. Like with the Cache Manager, recently I was caching the most used endpoints, the endpoints that are being called all the time. They hit the database a lot. There's no reason to not cache it for 1 hour. So I was using the Cache Manager package with Redis to cache those endpoints. When you are using a really good framework, of course, you don't really control the code because it's not your code, the code from the framework or from the library. But now you will speed up the development, and you will also use really good and well-maintained and tested code base that have been tested by so many people, because like Nest.js or Express.js is being used by hundreds of thousands of websites, even more. And then you are sure that, you know, if there's a bug, someone will report it. And that's also the beauty of the open source ecosystem. Now using a library that is not very popular or not very well maintained, or, you know, the developers, the contributors of the libraries are not really good, it could be a bit risky. You have to take that into account. Then, you know, when you are a software engineer, by understanding very well the product, by knowing what's important for them, or should I use AI first and or not? Well, you should always think prototype first, but yes, indeed, to code, you have to use the AI tools, because that will make the job better than you. It will make what you do more efficient and being built better and faster. So yes, always use the AI tools, but it's also about learning differently how you use them. Don't forget to add as much context as possible, to break down everything, to break down also your tasks, and to make them compatible for AI. And then don't hesitate to use agents, sub-agents. That was also something from Anthropic they introduced. The sub-agents is actually to resolve an issue the agents had. Like now the sub-agents are being controlled by the agent, and it helps a lot in the development of your API. You have to think very carefully about how I can set up some alerts. Maybe I will use PagerDuty. Maybe I will set up some alerts on AWS. Like you have, for instance, Route 63. I forgot the name. Yeah, I think it's Route 63 on AWS. You can also set some alerts there. And you need to have CloudWatch as well for all of the logins. You can use log entries. You should have a status page, like with BetterStack. BetterStack is really good. It's free. I love it. In my case, I use it myself. Like there are always a better way to build things, but it depends of the need of the company. It's like the horizontal or vertical scale. It depends on the company. It depends also on the legacy, how the backend was built, or is it just a server-side rendering app, or is it a backend where you have a RESTful API or a GraphQL API, which is really stateless? The same goes on microservice. If you want to break down everything into microservices with their own databases, I mean, each microservice will have its database, or you would have a monolith application. And also when you work within a team, like if you are not a lot of people, if you are like a team of 4, 5, 6, don't do microservices. It will overhead, like it will give you headaches because it's way too complex for what you need. Microservices is good if you are like 50, 60 people from your engineering team. And it depends also the way you architect microservices, like how small should be your microservice. Now for monolith, it's much easier, but again, it depends if you work on squad. It depends of, like if you want one team to work on one specific product, microservice could be better. It's the same with a monorepo or multi-repos. Multi-repos can be good if you want to isolate each product or each feature. Like you will have one feature, it will be one repo, but now it will have more pull requests. It's harder to maintain. You will have more code duplication with single repo. So monorepo is much easier to maintain, especially if you are a smaller team. It will be easier to ship. All of the pipelines could be on the GitHub Actions. You know, when you go to the workflow GitHub Actions, you can have all of your endpoints for everything in your monorepo. So you would have the mobile apps, for instance, you would have the API, you would have the front end, everything will be in one repo. Multi-repos are good, but again, depends of really the need of the company. If you really want to have each project to be isolated and to have a team working on each project, that's fine. But in my case, normally I would always suggest to do monorepo. It saves so much time over time. And you could also think about, we spoke about validation, but again, like an API, the way you validate the payload is extremely important, but also you have to take into account what will be, my API will be consumed by what. A mobile app, it will be Flutter maybe. If you want to go to hybrid native apps or React Native, it could be a Swift app, it could be a React frontend, it could be an Electron desktop app. When you change something in your validation, you have to remember that it could break also something from your desktop or from your frontend, from the app, consuming your API. The same goes if you use a device, an IoT device, that will make a request directly to your API. You could use a proxy API in between, like a bridge, to make it safer, but it has consequences. So when you are doing validation and when you are ensuring that everything will be validated the same way, again, gRPC is good, but it doesn't work for Swift, for Kotlin, for other stack. You could share types, you could have a better way to sync the types or the validation types for the payload, but you have to be careful that the more products, the more products you create that will consume your API, the more risky it will be. And you don't want to have bugs, you don't want to have a buggy product. And that will also be bad, it will ruin your reputation, but it will also be bad for the engineering team, because if you want to have a happy engineering team, like all of the software engineers to be happy, well, if everything is stable, if everything works well, if you use a good technology, if you use the latest stack, then people will be happier. But if everything is buggy and it's so hard to not introduce a new bug when you do a refactoring, then it will be unpleasant to work. It's the same with the principles. Like you could use the solid principles. You have S for single responsibility, only one single reason to change. Like single responsibility is about having one reason and only one reason of change, one responsibility. If your function does too much, then it means you violate the single responsibility, because if it does have more than one reason to change, then it has more than one responsibility. The O is for open closed. So open for extension, you would have like dependency injection. And also for the single responsibility, it helps if you do single, if you use dependency injection or dependency injection container. And open close, open for extension, so you would use dependency injection, for instance, and interfaces, but closed for modification, for changes. Liskov is the Liskov substitution, says that the superclass, the subclass should match with the superclass. So the definition of the function signature, what it returns, if it returns the specific data type, an array, an object, what it expects to return, the subclass should return the same than the superclass. And the same for the error exceptions, it should be consistent. If the superclass gives a user not found exception and the subclass gives a user 401 exception, it violates the Liskov substitution. Then you have the I for interface segregation. You shouldn't have a fat interface. You should have a lightweight, slim, small, multiple small and flexible interfaces instead of having a fat interface that forces the user to implement, to use things they don't need. Then you have the D for dependency inversion. Your high-level code shouldn't rely on the low-level code. That means if you have a database class, it shouldn't rely on the MySQL database engine or Postgres or MongoDB database engine. Well, usually to be relational or non-relational, but like MySQL, Postgres, MariaDB, and so on. So it's the high level and the low level. The high level module should never rely on the low level module. You create dependencies which are not good. So to remove all of those dependencies where the high level code knows about the low level code, you should use abstractions. You should use interfaces instead to prevent that. And that's it for the solid principles. But you have a lot of other principles to help you building better and more consistent software in the long term and to have a reliable application and infrastructure. Because the infrastructure, if the infrastructure is down, no one can use the service. But if your code doesn't work, no one can use the service either. So both of them are super important and are correlated. Finally, always be into product-centric, be a user-focused engineer. How I can make the life of the user better. And think about if a feature is really needed, why do we need this, and if it is beneficial for the user or not. And by prototyping again, by planning before coding, before jumping into the code, it will help a lot to ship better and more mature application. Otherwise, you might end up with premature optimization. If you don't think enough before, it's easy to optimize and to think about performance, but it might be too early. And so you might also create a problem that doesn't exist yet. And that's pretty much all for today. Always learn, research, and apply what you learn. It will help you to schematize and to clarify what you have learned by teaching back what you learned or by directly applying what you learned in your application, in the code base. in what you do. Teaching is very important because teaching really helps you to reinforce the knowledge in your head, to have a clear understanding of what you have done, of what you have learned. And it's also paid forward. You can do a like learning session, like learn and beer, like, you know, usually on Fridays you'd have a cider. You do, everybody would drink something, or, you know, it's like Friday afternoon, and it's like a chill out mood. And in the afternoon, someone would teach something, be and teach. You could do something like that, and you would also like give and share what you want to share. So, and people will ask you questions, and you will feel also like it's really good in the team to communicate well and to share the knowledge. I'm not sure how you can call that kind of session, but I have done that multiple times before in my company, in my previous companies. It works so well. Of course, every Friday someone has to do it. Otherwise, it's always the same people doing it. So usually on Slack or on a similar internal messenger, you can have a random, like to pick up randomly someone to say, hey, tomorrow it will be you to present something. I wish you a beautiful, happy product building day. I'm sure you will do amazing, and keep learning, keep researching, keep teaching, and I will see you in another video.